In a quiet bank in Lexington, Kentucky, where the hum of routine meets the rustle of cash, an old man shuffles in, Henry Clayton, weathered and worn, a tattered sack slung over his shoulder. "I'm the real owner," he croaks, and the room erupts in laughter, staff dismissing him as a relic of delusion. But that sack holds more than they imagine. The day was overcast and chilly as 78-year-old Henry Clayton slowly pushed open the heavy glass door of Lexington Trust Bank in Lexington, Kentucky. Outside, a crisp autumn wind rattled the skeletal branches of nearby trees. Inside the bank, the atmosphere was a study in contrasts. Sleek modern architecture paired with the timeless hum of an overworked air conditioner and the unmistakable, comforting aroma of freshly printed banknotes mingling with a faint dustiness that spoke of years gone by. Rows of polished wooden benches and counters glinted under the fluorescent lights, and the mechanical clicking of keyboards echoed softly amidst hushed murmurs as bank tellers went about their business. Yet, there was an undercurrent of gossip and suspicion. Whispered comments among the employees, furtive glances exchanged between cashiers, and dozens of curious eyes fixed on the man who had just crossed the threshold. Henry himself cut an unexpected figure against this modern backdrop. Dressed in a faded, worn-out overcoat that had clearly seen better days and sporting a bushy, patchy beard that lent an air of venerable gravitas, he clutched a battered leather bag close to his side. Every step he took was deliberate, his measured gait betraying the weight of decades carried in his heart. As he approached the main counter, his lined face set in a determined, almost imperious expression, he cleared his throat and spoke in a hoarse yet resolute voice. "I am the true owner of this bank." His words, though softly uttered, carried the force of a lifetime of inheritance and legacy that had been passed down through generations. A ripple of disbelief swept through the room. For a suspended moment, the ambient sounds, a persistent buzz from the air conditioner, the serenade of distant conversations, the clacking of computer keys, seemed to drain away, replaced by an anticipatory pause. But then, as if on cue, mocking laughter erupted from various corners of the branch. Some bank employees snickered behind their desks, while a few customers nearby exchanged incredulous glances and raised eyebrows. At the center of the growing cacophony stood Allison Brooks, the branch manager, whose perfectly coiffed hair and sharply tailored suit epitomized the polished image this institution had long cultivated. With a cold, derisive smile, she leaned forward and, dismissively waving her hand at the aging man, mocked, "Grandpa, go home. There's no place for jokes here." Her words, dripping with superiority and disdain, reverberated off the marble floor. The laughter that followed her remark swelled like a tidal wave. Cashiers whispered snide comments under their breath about the crazy old man and his worn-out bag, their voices barely audible but laced with scorn. Even the click-clack of keyboards seemed to punctuate every burst of derision. Henry's announcement, intended as a proud and rightful claim to his heritage, was met with uncontrolled mirth, a chorus of laughter that chilled him deeper than the winter air outside. His lined face remained stoic for a moment, yet his eyes betrayed a quiet consternation as he took in the ridicule. At that instant, the ambient noise, the steady whir of the air conditioner, the background clicking of keyboards, and the soft murmur of whispered gossip, seemed to merge into a single mocking sound that overwhelmed his words. The echo of his declaration was drowned by the raucous laughter and sneers of those present. Though his voice had carried the weight of legacy, in that moment it seemed insignificant against the power of ridicule. Henry's grip on his tattered bag tightened, his knuckles blanching under the force of his determination as he stood silently, absorbing the degrading spectacle before him. Every sidelong glance and whispered remark that floated by felt like another chisel against the foundation of his identity. A man whose bloodline stretched back to the founding days of the bank. The tension in the branch thickened palpably. Employees exchanged glances that betrayed amusement mixed with condescension. Visitors shushed one another, as if aware that this unexpected confrontation was beyond their ordinary transactions. In that charged moment, Henry's claim of ownership, a claim that had been forged in the crucible of personal and historical legacy, was met with a ruthlessly dismissive laughter that refused to acknowledge the truth of his words. His heart pounded in his chest as the smirks and scoffs of those around him deepened the cold bite of isolation. And so, as the mocking laughter reached its feverish crescendo in the sleek modernity of Lexington Trust Bank, Henry Clayton's quiet statement of heritage clashed with the derision of an institution that had long lost sight of its own history. The once steady hum of the bank was now punctuated by sneering voices and disdainful chuckles, the very air seeming to vibrate with the callous remnant of corporate arrogance. Despite the echo of mocking laughter still hanging in the air, Henry Clayton's eyes narrowed as he slowly reached into the battered leather bag clutched tightly at his side. With deliberate care, he produced a stack of yellowed, fragile documents that held the weight of decades. A faded original contract from 1947, the founding document of Lexington Trust Bank, its ink now softened by the passage of time, and an equally worn letter, its envelope stamped with official seals, signed by a respected attorney affirming his rights as the sole heir to the bank. In a voice that trembled not with fear but with the quiet power of inherited truth, Henry proclaimed, "You may laugh now, but these papers prove my family founded this bank, and I am its rightful owner." A murmur rippled through the room as the documents were slowly unveiled. The contract's faded lines, scrawled by the hand of his late father, evoked the storied history of the institution, while the lawyer's letter, a formal declaration of hereditary rights, shone as undeniable evidence of legitimacy. The once jubilant atmosphere of ridicule began to falter as puzzled glances were exchanged among the bank's staff, and even a few onlookers behind the counter began to scrutinize the documents with growing interest. At the counter, Allison Brooks, the branch manager who had first dismissed Henry with her biting remark, scoffed audibly. "This is absurd," she snapped, her tone laced with contempt. "You're nothing but a crank." The tension in the room spiked as her voice rang out, and before Henry could respond, she briskly reached for the phone and barked into it, "Security, come here immediately. We need to remove this disturbance." The sharp ring of the phone, the clicking of keys, and the sudden rustle of uniforms filled the space as a couple of security guards advanced from the back. Their eyes, trained to detect trouble, now flickered uncertainly between the grizzled figure of Henry and the sneering dismissal from Allison. For a moment, the bank's modern hum, the whir of the air conditioner, the muted clacking of keyboards, even the imperceptible ticking of clocks on the wall, seemed to warp under the pressure of raw injustice. Undeterred by the rising voices around him, Henry's expression remained resolute. His eyes, though rimmed with age and hardship, burned with a quiet determination to set the record straight. "I have always been telling the truth," he declared slowly, his voice steady despite the cacophony of derision. "I demand that my right be recognized. I insist on speaking with my lawyer." His tone, neither angry nor pleading, carried the weight of someone who had borne the burden of truth for far too long. The room seemed to hold its breath, the laughter fading into uncertain whispers. A security guard stepped forward hesitantly, his eyes darting between his superior Allison and the aging man who now stood as a living relic of a storied past. "Sir, please," the guard began, but was cut off by Allison's impatient bark. "Silence! Remove him from the premises immediately." Caught in the crossfire of authority and accountability, Henry raised one trembling hand as if to signal his unyielding right to be heard. "No," he said in a firm yet calm voice that resonated across the bank's marble floors. "I will not leave until my lawyer is here and these documents are acknowledged." His words, deliberate and unwavering, sent a charge of electricity through the opulent space. At that moment, the murmurs began to swell with uncertainty. Some bank employees exchanged looks that hinted at internal conflict between loyalty to their institution and the dawning realization of a long-forgotten truth. Customers in the waiting area shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their earlier amusement now replaced by an inexplicable tension. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, each sound amplifying the gravity of the standoff as Henry's demand echoed, a call for justice in a place where it had been long neglected. The atmosphere was now a delicate battleground between the entrenched arrogance of the establishment and the irrefutable legacy that Henry carried within that worn leather bag. Every detail, the hum of the air conditioner, the scent of fresh banknotes mixed with old paper, the murmur of whispered conversations, congealed into a single potent moment of defiant truth. In this charged silence, with security hovering uneasily in the background, Henry's calm insistence that the truth be heard and respected set the stage for an unfolding drama that would shake the very foundations of the bank. After a tense standoff at the counter, the murmur in the bank gradually shifted from disbelief to a flicker of concern as the branch manager's demand for Henry's removal lingered in the air. In response to his firm insistence that his lawyer be called, an employee quickly made a phone call from behind the counter. Within minutes, Michael Reed, a composed yet passionate attorney in his late 50s known for his unwavering commitment to justice, arrived at the branch. Dressed in a smart, dark suit with a modest tie and carrying a leather portfolio, Michael exuded quiet authority as he made his way briskly toward Henry. "Mr. Clayton?" Michael inquired in a soft but clear tone as he approached. His eyes, sharp and perceptive behind his glasses, scanned the faces in the room, many of which now brimmed with a mixture of curiosity and shifting attitudes. Henry regarded Michael with a mix of gratitude and lingering apprehension. "Yes," he replied, his voice steady despite the pain from earlier ridicule. He reached into his weathered leather bag and slowly began to unfold the yellow documents. The original 1947 contract that laid the foundation of Lexington Trust Bank and the accompanying letter which, along with later evidences, affirmed his rights as the sole heir. Michael carefully took the documents from Henry's trembling hands and began reviewing them at the counter, his eyes moving deliberately over the faded ink and the crisp edges of the official seals. After a lengthy moment of quiet analysis, Michael looked up, his voice low yet resolute. "Mr. Clayton, these are indeed authentic," he stated, nodding slowly as if confirming an unspoken promise made many years ago. "This contract, signed by your father, is genuine, and this letter, documented by an esteemed attorney, leaves no doubt about your rightful claim." His words were both a bomb and a clarion call, echoing powerfully in the stunned silence that slowly gripped the room. The atmosphere grew palpably heavier as Michael's declaration cut through the lingering murmur of derision. Still, some employees exchanged nervous glances, and a few whispering voices hinted that their previous amusement was now turning to skepticism in a way they had never expected. "It appears you are not merely a crank," one of the observers murmured quietly. Even Allison Brooks, who had earlier broadcast her dismissive scorn, now glanced anxiously between Michael and Henry, conflicted by the mounting evidence against her dismissive attitudes. Michael then took a deliberate step forward, addressing not only Henry but also the gathered staff and onlookers. "There is additional evidence," he announced, his tone steady and carefully measured. "I have with me a certified copy of your father's will and a notarized transcript of an audio recording from 1979. A conversation with an attorney that clearly confirms the illegal transfer of ownership in the 1980s. These documents show that after your father's passing, the bank's rightful ownership was, through dubious channels, diverted away from you." His words sent a shiver through the room. The sound of a nearby printer and the persistent hum of the air conditioner now punctuated the swelling tension. Henry's eyes glistened with a mix of relief and sorrow as he silently watched Michael methodically lay out the evidence. Michael's steady voice conveyed painful truths. Every phrase was imbued with the determination to see justice prevailed. "Your claim is not a mere story," Michael continued, holding up the notarized transcript so that several watching customers could see. "This recording captures a conversation where it is clear that the bank's records were manipulated to sideline your rightful inheritance. This isn't just about an old contract. It's about a history of corporate fraud that must now be rectified." At that, an uneasy silence fell over the branch. Even the very air seemed to vibrate with the weight of unrevealed secrets. The once mocking laughter was now replaced by tentative exchanges, as if the onlookers, having borne witness to the concrete evidence, were starting to understand that Henry's claim was as real as the air they breathed. Michael's measured tone left little room for doubt. The truth was unfolding before their very eyes. A few vital seconds passed before one of the guards, whose earlier resolution had hinted at a desire to maintain order according to the branch's protocols, hesitantly interjected, "Sir, what do you intend to do now?" The question, though barely above a whisper in the charged atmosphere, underscored the urgency and unpredictability of the situation. Michael replied firmly, "I intend to ensure that Mr. Clayton's rightful inheritance is acknowledged immediately. I have already prepared a formal request for a legal review of the bank's property transfer records. The facts are now indisputable. The truth must be recognized, and those who have manipulated our history must be held accountable." As Michael's words reverberated through the hushed room, a palpable tension met each syllable. The staff, initially brazen in their ridicule, now shifted uneasily, their confident facade cracking as reality dawned. Henry stood there, resolute and dignified, the weight of years of injustice lifting ever so slightly in the light of undeniable truth. Michael's calm assurance was a beacon in the midst of corporate arrogance and neglect, and the branch began to murmur with a mixture of remorse, astonishment, and anticipation of the forthcoming reckoning. Before the guard's question could spur any further motion, the tension in the bank was at its apex, a delicate balance suspended on the precipice of further evidence that would soon unravel the dark secrets of ownership manipulation and expose those responsible for past transgressions. The scene was set. Truth, once locked away in yellowed pages and hidden recordings, was about to unfold further, and the entire institution braced itself for the inevitable confrontation. With the murmurs still echoing from Michael's earlier declaration, Henry's eyes shone with renewed determination. Slowly, he reached back into his battered leather bag and retrieved a worn, leather-bound photo album clutched close for decades. As he carefully opened it, a series of black-and-white photographs began to reveal themselves on the desktop where the branch's document camera had been set up. The images showed a time long past, smiling faces framed by the gentle light of a bygone era. There, in one photograph, was his late father, proudly standing beside the original counter of Lexington Trust Bank, the contract of foundation in his hand, and a young, vibrant crowd celebrating the bank's inauguration in 1947. Another snapshot depicted a family gathering on the bank's grand opening day, while a faded newspaper clipping boasted headlines celebrating the establishment of this venerable institution. The photographs, their edges yellowed with age, bore witness to a legacy that stretched back generations. A legacy that, according to Henry's claim, had been usurped by a series of unscrupulous deals. As the room quieted, all eyes now riveted on the projector screen, Michael nodded for Henry to continue. Then, with deliberate care, Henry produced a small, portable audio recorder from his bag. The device, slightly scuffed from years of use, had been recording a crucial meeting in 1979. Michael connected the recorder to the courtroom's modest sound system so that its contents could be heard by everyone in the branch. A soft, crackling voice emerged from the device. A conversation between Henry's late lawyer and an unnamed associate, in which it was clearly stated that the bank's original ownership had been wrongfully transferred during the turbulent 1980s. Every word that resonated from that dusty recording carried with it the bitter truth. Fraudulent actions had systematically stripped Henry of his rightful legacy. The combined weight of the photographs and the audio evidence sent a shiver of collective disbelief through the quiet room. As the undeniable evidence played out, a palpable tension swept over the assembled staff and onlookers. The air seemed to thicken with remorse and shock. Whispers turned to murmurs of stunned silence, and even the previously dismissive gazes of some employees softened into looks of regret and anxiety. At that moment, a senior guard, who had been watching the entire scene with an expression of rising concern, took out his phone. His fingers moved rapidly as he made a discreet call, one that would change the course of the unfolding drama. Within minutes, the distant sound of sirens crept into the branch, growing louder and more insistent. Federal agents, in dark, unmarked SUVs, rushed up to the front of the bank. Their presence, highly choreographed and authoritative, sent a ripple of alarm through the entire branch. The guard's voice, firm and clinical, announced over the intercom, "All federal authorities, report to Lexington Trust Bank immediately. We have reason to believe fraudulent activity and misconduct are being exposed." The film of the unfolding evidence, now indisputable and harrowing, had reached the ears of those charged with enforcing the law. Moments later, well-dressed federal agents in crisp suits and dark, pressed uniforms stepped inside the bank. Their faces, inscrutable and cold, moved purposefully toward the center, where Allison Brooks, a branch manager whose earlier derision had seemed impenetrable, stood stiffly behind the counter. The officer's arrival was quiet yet forceful. One of them cleared his throat and said in a low, firm tone, "Ms. Brooks, you are under arrest for fraud and for obstructing justice in connection with the wrongful transfer of ownership of this bank." Allison's composure shattered in an instant. The arrogant sneer that had graced her face moments before gave way to wide-eyed shock and disbelief. Her perfectly arranged hair and pristine suit, symbols of her cultivated authority, now seemed incongruous amidst the insistent clamor of accountable justice. As the agents moved quickly to apprehend her and two other senior managers implicated in the fraudulent transactions, murmurs of astonishment filled the room. Employees and customers alike bent closer, craning their necks to catch every sight, a scene of high society arrogance collapsing under the weight of undeniable truth. Henry, his aged face lined with both sorrow and determination, observed the unfolding scene with a quiet dignity. The evidence he had safeguarded for so long had finally found its day in court, and the long-forgotten legacy of his family was being vindicated in real time. Michael Reed stood next to him, his expression a mixture of professional satisfaction and somber resolve, silently affirming that the wrongs of the past were now open to justice. As the federal agents escorted Allison Brooks and her accomplices out of the bank in handcuffs, the once derisive laughter that had mocked Henry's claim was replaced by heavy silence and murmurs of a community in shock. The dramatic turn of events marked the beginning of a reckoning, a moment when corporate greed and prejudice were finally being unmasked. The atmosphere was electric with the sense that justice was not a faded ideal, but a living force daring to reclaim its rightful place. In the aftermath of the federal agents' dramatic intervention, quiet murmurs and heavy silences spread throughout Lexington Trust Bank as the storm of scandal began to settle. Within hours, a formal court hearing was convened to review the explosive evidence presented by Henry Clayton and his attorney Michael Reed. In a stately courtroom with high ceilings, paneled walls, and large, ornate windows that cast shafts of pale light onto polished wooden benches, the pace of justice slowed, yet every ticking moment throbbed with the promise of retribution. The judge, a dignified man in a tailored robe and glasses perched on his weathered nose, presided solemnly over the case. With a measured cadence that resonated deeply in the hushed room, he addressed the gathered attorneys, bank employees, and press. After a thorough review of the evidence provided, which includes original documents dating back to 1947, the notarized transcript of the dubious ownership transfer, and compelling audio recordings that confirm a pattern of fraudulent misrepresentation, it is the judgment of this honorable court that the rightful ownership of Lexington Trust Bank be restored to Mr. Henry Clayton. His words echoed like a decree of long-awaited justice. A murmur of approval rose gently from those present as Henry, his face a mixture of relief and stoic determination, listened with trembling dignity. All fraudulent activities perpetuated under the management of Ms. Allison Brooks and her accomplices are hereby condemned. The judge continued, his voice firm. Ms. Brooks, along with the implicated senior managers, is to be suspended immediately and will face further legal proceedings for complicity in obstructing justice, corporate fraud, and deliberate attempts to misappropriate the legacy of this institution. The words fell heavy upon the courtroom like a final hammer blow. The gavel struck decisively, punctuating the magistrate's sentence. Gasps rippled through the gallery as the magnitude of the decision settled in, and even the most hardened skeptics could not hide their astonishment. In a swift, coordinated move, uniformed officers escorted a stunned Allison Brooks and her two conspirators out of the courtroom. Their faces, which had once worn airs of superiority, now displayed shock, disbelief, and a dawning realization of the collapse of their facade. Michael Reed offered a curt nod to Henry, silently affirming that truth had, at long last, emerged victorious. The judge then turned his gaze toward Henry and spoke softly yet with resolute authority. Mr. Clayton, your evidence has proven your rightful claim. This court orders that Lexington Trust Bank revert to your control forthwith. Moreover, let this case serve as a reminder that integrity must guide our institutions. No amount of corporate maneuvering can supersede the truth. Outside in the cool autumn air, as the courthouse steps filled with reporters and curious onlookers, the news spread like wildfire. Headlines began to appear: bank ownership restored, old man Clayton vindicated, and scandal shakes Lexington Trust, fraud uncovered and justice served. The shock that had once drawn derisive laughter in the bank was replaced by solemn nods of respect and a communal recognition of long overdue justice. Back at the bank, reinvigorated by the court's decision, Henry Clayton stood in his office, a modest, newly reclaimed corner of the institution that once belonged to his family. Sunlight from high windows illuminated his aged, lined face with a gentle glow, and his eyes sparkled with quiet triumph. With meticulous care, he gathered the documents that had become the cornerstone of his vindication. Clasping the battered leather bag to his chest one last time, now a symbol not of despair but of a hard-won legacy, he reflected on the century-spanning battle for truth that had led him to reclaim what was rightfully his. In a final act of symbolic closure, Henry arranged a simple ceremony at the bank's newly reformed executive suite. With a modest crowd of longtime employees and a few loyal clients present, he appointed a new manager who embodied fairness, transparency, and respect. As part of his new vision for the bank, Henry announced plans to use a portion of the bank's recovered profits to restore his family's once fabled farm, a place that had long been the heart of his heritage. "Today," he said, his voice echoing softly through the renovated halls, "we honor the truth and reaffirm that justice prevails when all voices are heard." His words, simple yet profound, resonated with everyone. In that very moment, as graceful notes of sincere applause swept through the room, Henry walked over to a newly polished mahogany desk. Gently, he placed the battered leather bag, a relic of trials overcome, at the center of the desk. With a small, content smile, he murmured almost to himself, "Sometimes, truth carries more weight than it seems." The bag, once a symbol of his misfortune, now stood as a testament to resilience, a quiet relic of a battle fiercely fought and honor restored. In the weeks and months that followed, Henry Clayton's victory reverberated throughout Lexington. The once mocked, downtrodden figure had become a symbol of integrity and perseverance, not only within the bank but across the entire community. With the court's decision firmly in his favor, Henry officially reclaimed his rightful ownership of Lexington Trust Bank. Word of his triumph and the scandal that had led to the arrest and suspension of Allison Brooks and her accomplices spread like wildfire through local newspapers, on television, and across online forums. Headlines such as "True Legacy Restored," "Henry Clayton Reclaims Lexington Trust," and "Corporate Fraud Exposed, Justice Triumphs in Lexington" filled the media, stirring public debate and prompting calls for new safeguards against corporate malfeasance. Inside the bank, a palpable change had taken place. Under Henry's careful guidance, new management was installed, a team selected for its core values of transparency, fairness, and respect for the institution's long, storied heritage. Michael Reed, Henry's steadfast attorney, played a crucial role in the subsequent legal review, ensuring that all records related to the fraudulent transfer were publicly scrutinized. The bank's board announced sweeping internal reforms aimed at restoring confidence among customers and employees alike. These measures included stricter oversight of property transfer processes, enhanced cyber archiving of legacy documents, and ongoing audits to prevent any future misuse of authority. For Henry, however, the personal victory was far more profound than the corporate restructuring that now enveloped the bank. With the injustice of the past finally rectified, he turned his attentions to restoring the family legacy that had once flourished on his ancestral farm. Determined to revive the love, labor, and tradition of his youth, Henry used a portion of the bank's recovered profits to purchase and renovate the old family farm that had lain dormant for decades on the outskirts of Lexington. Over time, he transformed it into both a working farm and a community center, a living monument to integrity and hard work. The freshly tilled soil, the newly sprouting crops, and the repaired barn windows all echoed with the promise of a new beginning. As autumn yielded to a bright spring, Lexington buzzed with talk of the old man with the bag who had defeated corporate greed. Residents in local coffee shops, during town hall meetings, and even in friendly neighborly chats, spoke of Henry's quiet persistence and his determination to honor his family's legacy. The story had become an emblem of hope for those who believed that truth and perseverance could topple even the most entrenched systems of corruption. In his newly inaugurated office at the bank, now replete with modern yet tasteful decor juxtaposed against relics of the past, Henry performed a poignant ritual. He placed his battered leather bag, now transformed from a symbol of past hardships into a cherished keepsake, at the center of his mahogany desk. Its worn texture and faded edges spoke of decades of struggle and survival, each imperfection a memory of battles fought and lost, now vindicated by the triumph of his truth. With a small, reflective smile, Henry softly murmured, "Sometimes, truth weighs more than it seems." Those words carried a profound resonance, as if the very essence of his journey had been distilled into that single, quiet statement. Thus, as the community embraced sweeping reforms and Henry's reclaimed bank began anew, the old man's legacy shone as a beacon of moral righteousness and resilience. He often strolled the revitalized family farm, watching as new life blossomed on the fertile ground, a testament to the idea that even in the face of corporate greed and bitter derision, unwavering faith in truth and hard work can ultimately rebuild what was lost. And so, in Lexington, amidst renewed hope and a community united by justice, Henry Clayton's once-forgotten inheritance became a symbol of the enduring power of integrity. I hope you enjoyed this story. Leave a comment, sharing your thoughts about it. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new and equally exciting stories. See you in the next video.